So my friend Joshua, right? We never sang together before Focus because he wasn't a Christian before lockdown, and now we get to sing together. It's just how fun's that? It's just special, right? Um, it's funny. I finished this morning with a story about my dad, and I'm going to start this one with the same. I meant to bring it with me, but I didn't really want to because I didn't want it to get wet. But I've got a Bible that I got from my dad after he died. This is now 21 years ago, and I like it. Ever so often you go through it and I see something that he highlighted, or I see a little note that he put from a sermon, and I love that. But occasionally there's a bit of paper that falls out of the Bible. I took a little photo of it. It'll come on the screen. You won't be able to read it because it's on the screen, but I'll tell you what it says. It's not that one. It'll come in a minute. It's a note that you could date it because it was written in Comic Sans. There it is. Before Instagram bought Comic Sans back last year. But so after Dad came back to us, he had cancer, prostate cancer that was spread all over his body, and he has this note written in the back of his Bible. It's called My Vision, and it says, "I want to walk in ever-growing intimacy with God. I want to be set free from this cancer and all of its effects. I want my marriage to prosper. I want to pursue the healing ministry that God has for me. I want to build a business to bless the kingdom." It's a good vision, isn't it? It's a great vision. It didn't happen. His dad died from cancer. And I'm not happy about that. I'm angry about it, actually. I'm very disappointed. It's something that I look back with questions on. And each one of you will have moments like this where you look back with questions. Why did that not go how I hoped? Why did that situation not turn out the way that I've been hoping and praying and believing it would happen? Why did that job not come about? Why did that friendship not happen the way I hoped? We've all got these things, these moments in our lives. Some of you have had several of these moments where it just seems wrong, doesn't it? It just doesn't quite seem fair. It doesn't quite seem right. It all seems in the wrong order, the wrong way round. And they hurt. And in these places, we've got two options. We either let that offense, that hurt, that pain take root and become part of our identity and our story, that whatever, God doesn't come through for me like that, or I'm not that sort of a person, or I'm not going to see that kind of stuff in my life. Or we say, despite the pain, despite the offense, despite the hurt, I'm still going to pursue God with everything. I'm still going to keep going. And the word I'm giving this message tonight is unoffended. I want to talk for a little bit about being unoffended. Because when we take offense, it just robs us of life. It robs us of joy. It robs us of destiny. It robs us of calling. It robs us of being the people God's made us to be. But when we can walk unoffended, we can see God do some amazing things. And so we're going to dive into tonight. We're going to jump around the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. We'll start in Genesis 37 if you're following your Bibles. We'll go to a few places. But that's where we're going to start. As everyone gets out the Bibles and flicks to Genesis 37. And we meet this guy Joseph. If you don't know the story, you can watch it. And Joseph and the Amazing Colour Dreamcoat. It's a great show. I saw it years back with Philip Schofield. And we were just a few months late to get Jason Donovan. But there you go. Jason's back doing the Pharaoh cameo. Oh yeah, you saw it last week, didn't you? Yeah. So Joseph, we meet him when he's 17 years old. He's the favourite son of his dad, because his dad had a few wives and this one was his favourite, and Joseph was young. I mean, this story alone is enough to why one man, one woman is enough. But so let's join the story. Genesis 37, verse 3 to 8. Now Israel, that's Joseph's dad, Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he'd been born to him in his old age, and he made him an ornate robe. When his brothers saw that his father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, offense, and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and what he said. You see in Joseph's brothers what happens when we allow offense to take root. That they looked at his brother and thought, hold on, how come he's getting a special cloak? How come that's going well for him? How come my friend's got 10,000 Instagram subscribers and no one even follows mine? How come everything's going well for that person? And offense takes root. And it says they hated his brother. I mean, Joseph, it turns out, is quite an impressive guy, we learn a little bit later. But they hated him. When offense takes root in us, that didn't go my way, out it comes. Why aren't I the favourite? Why didn't I get the coat? And so a little bit later, Joseph gets sent to join his brothers. They're out looking after animals. And when his brothers see them, the offense has taken such root, they wanted to kill him. That was the point they got to. They wanted to kill him. But then actually what they did was they saw some guys traveling past, so they sold their own brother. Just think about that for a minute. When offense takes root, they sold their own brother, and then they covered it up. And they we'll see what they did in Genesis 37:34. It says, Jacob tore his clothes, this is his dad, put on sackcloth and mourned for his son for many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." And his father wept for him. That's what happens when we allow offense to take root. We end up hurting people and breaking hearts and causing mess and causing damage. When that anger, when that frustration, when that disappointment, when that bitterness, we allow it to sit in our hearts. But meanwhile, just wink at the person next to you, say, Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guards. A bit of a side note, but there's always a meanwhile with God. Things aren't going well. Things aren't going the way I hoped. All of that stuff's not great. Meanwhile, God's doing something. Meanwhile, there's something bubbling up. Meanwhile, Romans tells us he's taking all things and using them for our good. There's a meanwhile. And you might be here right now thinking, this is rubbish. Life is going terribly. This is all not fair. There's a meanwhile. Meanwhile, God's in the move. But this one doesn't look that great to start with. Because the meanwhile here is that Joseph's been sold to one of Pharaoh's officials. So it doesn't look like a great meanwhile. But actually, it's a stepping stone that God's going to use in Joseph's story. We'll carry on the story a little bit. Skip a different chapter, and then to chapter 39. Joseph was well built and handsome. I know how that feels. And after a while, his master took notice of I've got a funny story, but it's embarrassing for someone, so I'll hold it back. But after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns and he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. He was the favorite son of Jacob. Got this wonderful cloak. He was just, he couldn't have been in a better place. He got everything he needed. And then his own brothers sold him as a slave. He's now a slave in this person's house. He's got some reasons to be upset. This is a significant demotion. But he says, how could I sin, do such a wicked thing against God? In his place of pain, his place of offense, his place of disappointment, he still doesn't compromise. And we were talking this morning about holiness. But what a thing this is, eh? He could have missed out if he allowed offense to take root, but he would not. He looked at his circumstances, thought, well, here's where I am. I'm going to follow God faithfully in this place. He didn't compromise his ruler or his God, despite the fact this feels like a step down. So as part of my sort of vicar training, I did a couple of years security at a church in southwest London, and then I went to HDB as a part of the church in London that this network's part of. And I thought, this is exciting. I'm off to HDB, this big exciting church. Well, it turns out when I got there, they actually had nothing for me to do other than just drink it in, get involved. And I remember one day they asked me to help with someone who was taking in the Sainsbury's delivery to get all the food ready for the various services. I had like 12 services across 4 sites at the time. And I was helping this wonderful lady, and I was giving it all the mouth in love. I was like, you've got such a great job, like you get the food ready so that everyone who comes to the service feels welcomed and at home. Just think, as you're packing that bit of donuts in that box and that bit of milk in that box and that stuff in the fridge, you are like making people feel welcome. Guys are going to become Christians because of your hospitality. A couple of weeks later, it was my job. I didn't feel so good about it then. I didn't think it was such a great job. I wasn't thinking about the people who are coming to be welcomed well for the first time I hosted. I was thinking, what the heck's going on? I used to be important. Now I'm doing the Sainsbury's delivery. There was offense that I was allowing in my story, rather than saying, I'm here in this season. How do I follow God well? How do I follow God faithfully? And it's interesting. I don't have a lot of regrets in my life. I used to regret never seeing S Club 7, but I got to fix that one by seeing them at the reunion. I do have one regret, that I didn't go see Chaz and Dave, and now there's only one of them. So that is a regret. Like they played in the Albert Hall when I was at HGB. It was just literally half a mile down the road. Could have walked there, but anyway, yeah, Paul's seen them twice. You see, but I'm not going to let offense take root. But the only things I actually look back on with regret is when I was entrusted with something and I didn't treat it like it was the greatest privilege of my life. I was given something to steward. I was given a role somewhere. Look after the prayer team. Look after that thing. Do that. And I didn't grab hold of it and say, okay, I'm going to do this like I'm doing it for Jesus. I'm going to treat this job for this season like it's the greatest privilege in my life. And I'm going to do it well. Like how we see Joseph seem to do with everything he does. And I wonder if for a few of us, the Lord just wants to gently wake us up and say, let's not sit in offense. Let's take this moment, this season, while I'm caring for that elderly parent, or while I'm in this job I don't really like, or while I'm doing stuff here in lockdown that's a bit different. Imagine if I treated this like the greatest privilege ever. What might I see God do if I don't let offense take root, but I really serve my socks off? It doesn't go well for Joseph. His Potiphar's wife tells a tale that actually he tried to attack her, and we're told in Genesis 39 verse 19, when his master heard this story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. Just turn to the person next to you, the Lord's with you. Turn to the person on the other side, your second choice friend. So the Lord's with you. The Lord is with you. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he made him responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. How many reasons has Joseph got to be upset? Millions. How many times has God let him down? Millions. How much disappointment, real disappointment, is he facing? Loads and loads and loads. It's real. It's not trivial. It's not small. It's not little things. These are big things. And you guys might be facing some big things. Sold by his brothers as a slave, wrongly accused of a crime, put in prison hundreds of miles from home. It can't get much lower than this. But still, he's unoffended. Still, he honors God. Still, he has success. And there's something about unoffended people that actually snaps me out of my rubbish. Like, sometimes if I sit down with someone and I hear the story of the challenges and the pain and the disappointments and the times that God hasn't come through for them, and I see how amazing and faith-filled they are, it just does something to me. There's something about unoffended people that just sets a fire inside of me that says, come on, I can do this. I can follow God faithfully. I can be the person God's made me to be. Like, the stuff is real. And you might be literally in that pit right now. But what we see with Joseph is he still wants to see God now. He still knows who he is. He walks in his identity rather than walking in offense. And so a few more things happen in Joseph's story. A baker and a cupbearer, they're in the prison with him because it's the prison for Pharaoh's officials, and where Joseph's in charge, and they have a couple of dreams, and we'll do this one. In chapter 40, verse 8, Joseph said to them, "Do not all interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." In that place, he was so confident in his identity that he could speak the words of God to people, even though God had let him down so many times. Even if you feel like God's let you down so many times, you can still speak the words of God to people. You can still speak words of life to your colleagues. You can still speak words of life to your family. You can still be there and shine in that place. And anyway, Joseph interprets the dreams, and he gets them right. It's bad news for the baker, good news for the cupbearer, and he gets reinstated into his role. But it says in chapter 40, verse 23, the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. It's not going well, is it? Now he's forgotten. After all of that. Chapter 40, verse 1. When 2 full years had passed. Just think about that for a minute. That's longer than we've been in COVID. 2 full years, Joseph's been sitting in prison since that moment that he helped the cupbearer. It's a long time. God's not doing that well. If he wrote a list of unanswered prayers, I bet he's got a big one. But Pharaoh has some dreams that confuse him and agitate him and worry him. He doesn't know what to do with them. And so, in chapter 41, verse 9 to 16, the chief cupbearer says to Pharaoh, "Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night. Each of us had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream, and things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position. The other man was impaled. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he'd shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh. But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. He still carries this faith in God. He still is unoffended. He still won't let the setback after setback after setback, after disappointment, after pain, after being forgotten, after all this stuff, he still says, God's going to use me right here. Speaking to you. And you can look back and see the many opportunities he had to go a different way. But again and again, he just wouldn't let offense, wouldn't let pain, wouldn't let disappointment become the central theme of his story. The theme there is the goodness of God. The theme there is my identity in God. The theme there is that I'm going to follow him faithfully and worship him with everything. And so Joseph interprets a dream for Pharaoh. And it's a dream that basically says we're going to have 7 great years of bounty, loads of stuff's going to grow. And then you're going to have 7 years where nothing's going to grow. And he says, if I were you, Pharaoh, don't mean to outstep my station, but I'd find someone brilliant who could oversee that. Get some storehouses, store stuff away for 7 years, and then we'll be all right for the second 7. And Pharaoh says in Genesis 41, verse 37, the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find someone like this man in whom is the Spirit of God? Now, Pharaoh wasn't Jewish. This God wasn't his God. But Pharaoh says, can we find anyone like this man in whom is the Spirit of God? When we push into holiness, when we are unoffended, when we walk in our identity, people will say, we need someone like Helen who the Spirit of God is in. We need someone like Matt in who the Spirit of God dwells. We need someone like Valeria because she carries something different to what I see around me. We need someone like that. That's what happens when we walk unoffended. That's what happens when we walk in our calling and identity as holy people. That's what happens when we walk in identity. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God's made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. Looking at Joseph, you might not think it's that wise to be following God still. It's not working, Joseph. A wise thing would be to try something else. This God of yours, he's not very good. But no. There is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. When we live unoffended, that was added to my message. When we live unoffended, we actually give God the space to help us step into our calling. There's one more verse I just want to give you. Actually, a couple more. Actually, I'm lying to you. One more right now before I say something else. Genesis 41:46. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh the king. Turn to the person next to you and say 30 years old. Who was listening at the start when I told you how old Joseph was when we started this? Joseph was 17. So who can do some maths for me? 13 years of this rubbish. 13 years of this heartbreak. 13 years of this disappointment. 13 years of God not coming through. 13 years of God failing to demonstrate he is who he says he is. But consistently, Joseph says, my circumstances say one thing, but I believe something different. That God is still faithful, that God is still holy, that God is still worthy, that God is still good, that God is still with me, even though I get demoted and demoted and demoted. For 13 years, for 13 years of disappointment. And what we see at the end is something truly amazing happen. Like Joseph had a lot of time to stew, a lot of time to blame, but he didn't. He doesn't do that. He lives unoffended. And when we live unoffended, we open the door to see God do amazing things. When we stay faithful even when it hurts, even when it doesn't make sense, even when real stuff, I'm not talking down or belittling anything you're going through or gone through. It's real and it's serious and it hurts. But when we say, despite that, I will not be offended. I will not live my life in comparison. I will not live my life looking at what I haven't got. I will not make a list of the things God hasn't done. I'm going to make a list of the things that He is. And then we get to walk in all that He's got for us. Final bit of the story, just to bring full circle. His brothers come to visit him. Now's his chance to get revenge. He can finally teach them. They'll be sorry, won't they? I mean, to be fair, he is a little bit cheeky. He tests them for a little while. So 10 of his brothers come. His little brother, Benjamin, stays at home because his dad cannot lose another youngest son. The other 10 come. He says, go back and get the other one, or we won't get any food, or something. And then he comes back with the 11th one, and then he plants a cup in his youngest brother Benjamin's bag, his silver cup. And then when they leave, he sends the LAPD after him, and they bring him in, and he says to them, listen, I can't believe you've stolen from me after my kindness. I'm going to lock this guy up forever. And then his other brother, in Genesis 44, verse 43, he says, now then, please, let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that will come on my father. It's a bit different from the old, giving him the robe and telling him that a wild animal killed his son. And just one little thought on this bit, slightly off topic. But often the people that upset us aren't actually as bad as we think they are. Occasionally they are. But generally speaking, they're actually just hurting, broken people like you and me, with their own set of issues, their own set of pains, their own set of events. And that's what we find here, that actually second time round, they're different. I could not put my father through that, so let me be your servant rather than him. There's been a shift in those guys. At this point, at Genesis 45, Joseph could no longer control himself before his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers, and he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. You see, because when things weren't going well for them, they killed him. And so he sort of had every right to do the same. But he doesn't harbour offence like that. Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here. Wow. Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. Don't be angry with yourselves. God sent me ahead of you to save lives. That's not an offended perspective, is it? That is an unoffended perspective. For 2 years now, there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there'll be no ploughing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. This is the sort of fun we get to have if we live unoffended. Now, you're not all going to be rulers of Egypt, but I wouldn't put it past a couple of you. But we do get to walk in all that God's got for us. We do get to see his kingdom come, his will be done on earth like in heaven. We do get to see people healed and restored. We do get to see lives change. We do get to build things that make earth a bit more like heaven. We do get to love people to life. We do get to walk in calling and purpose and faith and courage every day of our lives. If we can push past offense, if we can lay down bitterness, if we can say, this isn't quite how I hoped right now, but I'm still going to walk faithfully. I'm still doing this with you. I'm still going to be unoffended. A couple of other Bible examples. Someone like Ruth, who lost her husband. And it would have made absolute sense for her to leave her mother-in-law and look after herself. But she was unoffended. And she saw blessing. She was actually part of Jesus' line. Or Esther, who was orphaned, lost everything. Like, the wise thing to do would have been to look after herself. But no, she was unoffended. So when the moment came, she spake courageously and got to save her people. Or someone like Peter. Peter, who let down Jesus in such an embarrassing way. At that point, he had a lot of reasons to hold offense, to say, actually, I'm no good. I'm not enough. I can never do that. I'm not that kind of person. Why did you put me there? But he didn't let offense take root. And he saw miracles. In fact, he spoke at the first revival because he didn't let offense take root in his life. Or someone like Paul, shipwrecked, beaten, in prison, let down by Christians. Paul had every reason to sack it all in, but he wouldn't let offense take root in his spirit. And he got to see joy and discipleship and seeds sown that are still bearing fruit today. There's something that happens when we push past offense. Is that we really get to be the people God's made us to be. We really get to live out our calling. I mean, you know the Pattern Church dreams and vision, inviting people into Family to Serve Swindon. You know the stuff we're running after? 1,000 baptisms. We're at 2% of that as of last week. How cool is that? But here's the thing, right? There's about 200 of us here this weekend. If we all manage to help one friend find Jesus, that's 200 baptisms. We do that again, that's another 400 on top of that with our new mates. We could do it in a couple of years. There's all the kinds of reasons and excuses I play, and I talk through, and it's real stuff. But what if actually all the challenges are real? It's weird talking to your friends about Jesus, and some people it takes a long time. And so I'm picking on Joshua so much tonight. How many times did Jeff invite you along to Alpha? 5 times. 5 different Alpha courses. Well, guess what? If Jeff got offended after 4, we've got no Joshua with us. But if he pushed past the setbacks and knockbacks, guess what he got to see? He got to see his mate join the family. There's something about unoffense that opens doors. I don't know what offense you're carrying. I don't know who you're comparing yourself to and thinking this isn't fair. I don't know what pain you might be carrying right now, the disappointment, the sadness, the bitterness, the stuff that's really hurt you along the way, the thing you wish life looked like right now, and it doesn't. That relationship you wish you had, that child you wish you had, that situation you wish you were in, that job, that house, that whatever. It's real. It's significant. But I wonder if tonight is the night to lay down that offense and say, I'm done carrying the bitterness for that. I'm done carrying the weight for that. This is where I am, and I'm still praying for God to change it. But in the meantime, I'm going to live unoffended. In the meantime, I'm going to take this season that I'm in right now, and I'm going to run at it with everything. I'm going to take this opportunity that God's placed in my hands, this person who's really a headache, but I'm going to love them. I'm going to do that like it's the greatest privilege that's ever been given to anyone. And the Holy Spirit's going to help us with this. But the big old barrier is offense. That I'm letting this take root and it's going to stay there. But we've been forgiven so much. Our story is a story of grace. And it's an imagine if. Imagine if we left it here on Limp Farm this year. Imagine if we left the offense. We left the bitterness. We left that sense of this hasn't gone how I hoped. And we just stepped past it. We said, I'm here now. Imagine what this next year could look like. We don't know what's going to happen coming out of COVID, how it's all going to play out. But how would that feel if you left the offense here? If we prayed, asked God to help us and say, I'm taking that off now, I'm done with that. That's not serving me well. It was real, it hurted, it wasn't what I hoped. But I'm going to leave it on the field. And I'm going to walk faithfully with Jesus into next season. Let's stand, we're going to pray. We haven't been able to do this for a year and a half, but we're going to do a bit of ministry.